all for coming out to the first of many Atlanta AI meetups. My name is Curtis Frazier. I am in charge of sales and events for Autonomous Agent AI Consulting. So please give it up for yourselves for coming on out. Thank you guys for coming out. Do not judge me. I'm going to read some index cards because I want to make sure I covered all bases since this is the first of many, so kind of a rough draft. So bear with me. Got that out the way. All right. First of all, we are proud to be sponsoring tonight's meetup for Dirty South AI. This is the first of mini demo nights. So what we're going to be doing is having these every month. We're going to be showcasing AI projects as well as help foster the community. Our presenters tonight will be Tim Iang with You42. We have Evie Wealthley with Keyboarder and Fleming Sloan with Autonomous Agent AI Consulting. So we're just going to give you guys some demos. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Anything you want to kind of add to it, please feel free to do that as well. And I will pass it off to our first presenter, Mr. Tim Iang.
Hey Curtis, quick question.
Yes.
With the presenters, is it best, maybe it's individual each, but should we ask questions at the end or during?
Probably during, because, you know, let them answer
As
like
it's
real
relevant.
time, you know?
Sure.
So, yeah.
What the questions are.
Right. And here we go. Yeah.
I'm good on the mic.
Oh, good. Okay.
I think I'm just room time. Room volume. All right. So Fleming and I, we work together on a lot of stuff, and basically he has to do a talk. I had something else planned, but bit of delay on that and whatnot. And so really last night I was just thinking about something to talk about, and what I wanted to talk about was really just how I've incorporated AI into my workflows. So for background, I'm not sure how many of us are all in tech. Show of hands. Everybody? Okay. Nearly everybody. Anyways, so like, I've been playing around with all, if you're in tech, you would know that, this thing is just in our face. We have like no choice but to really try to incorporate the ways of working and things like that and find out how to use these tools and whatnot. And so basically what I opted to talk about, just because my original plan wasn't really ready, was just more of like a high level talk on like my experience, what I call the productivity illusion and how I'm managing it. So I'm not like an AI researcher or anything like that by any means. I don't work directly on AI or anything like that, but I do heavily use it. And so just to kick us off, a little background, I'm a software developer. I've been working professionally for like 8 years now across like some Fortune companies and then most recently a startup. And my primary focus is web dev, but I pretty much I've pretty much done everything in my career from like front end, back end, cloud infrastructure and all that sort of stuff, DevOps stuff and all that sort of stuff. And so, I've been using this like a lot of people ever since it went viral, GPT-3, whatever it may be, copying and pasting into the chat inputs and whatnot. And now we have, all these harnesses, Claude Code, Codex, all that sort of stuff that, we runs directly on our machines against our file systems. And so, like I said, I'm not like an AI engineer or anything like that, and tokens don't really mean anything. But just to give you like a grasp of like, I think a lot of what I'm drawing on from here is personal experience and like what I've found to be stuff slowing me down, stuff that helps me speed up, and all that sort of stuff. And so, like for the month of May here closing up, you can see that like. My main harnesses are Claude Code and Codex, and you can see that like on my personal machine alone, not even encompassing what I do at work and whatnot with it, you can see I get pretty heavy usage out of it. So,
Hey Tim, can you, on that slide, your ratio of input to output is way skewed towards output on Claude and inverted on Codex. Could you talk about that?
So, I think when it comes to Claude, I've been using Claude way longer, and I've been operating on the same code bases. And so I haven't honestly like looked at the input output tokens, but my assumption would be that because Claude is been the harness that I mostly used up until recently. Started using codecs more with GPT 5.5. What I've seen is that, my assumption would be is that it's likely that Claude is just a lot more cached tokens already. So when it's working in these same code bases and whatnot from previous months, you know, a lot of the input is input, and I guess, you can see there's a lot of cache reads there versus cache creates, and I guess the CLI tool I use for this is called CC usage. I guess it says 0 cache create for codecs, which I highly doubt is the case, and so there might just be some like misreporting there. But yeah, my assumption would be cache input and whatnot. So yeah, so you know, I have the subscription, so I'm definitely not paying $3,900 out of pocket for this every month. I mean, I think I get good usage out of it, but I don't think it would exceed $3,900 of like what I'm getting back. And maybe that's a skill issue, but I think for me, the big thing that I've learned, you know, all these months, just trial and error, different types of stuff, is that like it's easy to feel like you're being productive with AI. You have all these agents spinning up, doing different things, different times and whatnot, you know, it just spits out code. It spits out stuff that seems like it works and stuff like that. And so a lot of times you feel like you're getting a lot more done than you do until you really like look into the weeds of things. You realize that like, oh, we made a wrong assumption here and we went down that path, and then we had to go back here, and then oh, now you have to untangle this mess and all that sort of stuff. And so yeah, I guess at the, you know, the crux of it all, you know, it's easy to kick off any of these agents. You just send a prompt, boom, there's a little spinner going, and it's just chugging away, spin out files, spin out code and whatnot. And then that's like a slippery slope. You feel like you're doing a lot. Next thing you know, you're running multiple agents and whatnot. So there was a period of time where, you know, I'd be working on something at work, also like a side project at the same time and all that sort of stuff. And at least for me, like context switching, I guess that leads into like what I think the trap is here. And, you know, I think, especially when you're working with something like writing code and stuff like that, you kind of want to be full focus. You want to have like full clarity on like the task at hand, what you're trying to solve and whatnot. And context switching, I mean, I don't know, some people are built for that. I'm certainly not. You know, it takes me a decent bit of time to like get back into like what is going on with the particular thing I'm working on. And so that, you know, I think that's a trap in and of itself. Just, it feels so powerful to be able to spin up different work trees and have different things going on, but you know, you really want to be reviewing the output and all that. You know, as good as they are, you don't want to just blindly trust it unless it's some like throwaway side project that you're just playing around with for fun or whatnot, right? And in that case, sure, you might be able to get away with that. But yeah, I guess at the, you know, the base of it all, you know, output alone is in progress. I would hope that for more serious things, we're all reading, you know, judging, making corrections and all that sort of stuff, as opposed to just running with it on the fly. And so, yeah, with all these different agents spitting out code, assuming you're reviewing it, well, now the job is a lot of review. And, you know, as a software engineer, like that's always been like the most like mundane part of the job. You know, you get some PR or whatever it may be, and you're just like, oh, here I go, I gotta read this stuff. And so, you know, it's taken a lot of fun.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, Fleming sends me a ton, and so, and they're big ones too, and so, you know, like, yeah, that'll take up your whole day. And so, yeah, essentially now, like, especially with multiple agents and whatnot, if you're not, you know, grounding yourself and really like watching and just letting it, sending it off and just letting it build the whole thing and not catching it in its tracks when it's making what you would perceive to be a mistake and stuff like that, then it's just, you know, at the end it's going to be something you're just going to have to unravel and solve later, untangle later. And so, again, a lot of what I'm about to get into is mostly like my personal experience, how I think that I've been able to like close the gap essentially. And so if a lot of what I perceive the gap to be is, you know, like that reviewing of the output and whatnot, I think the only way I don't think you're fully going to be able to like close the gap, at least at the current capabilities, to where you're just literally fully hands off and you just get pristine stuff output. But I've definitely built some stuff into my workflows that I think makes the output, more in line with what I'm hoping it would be, which leads to less of that back and forth loop of, oh, fix this, oh, redo that, blah, blah, blah. And so, I think at the core of it all, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all solution. There's a ton of skills out there you can download. There's a ton of tools you can download and all that sort of stuff, but, we all work differently. Some of us can handle 5 agents running off at once. Other people prefer to be more like pair, like step-by-step, just pair programming and whatnot. And so, you're gonna have to, I think when it comes to a lot of the stuff we have like freely available that you can just download and plug in, a lot of what I like to do is more so look at the actual skill that I might be downloading or interested in downloading in, and then making it my own and tweaking it in a way that like I can, that fits me better. And so that leads me into our next part, like closing the gap. Again, like I said, this is like my personal opinion on how you should do things and whatnot. And I think for a lot of us, maybe a lot of this is redundant information. I'm sure a lot of you know this, but you have to understand what we're working with. And so first thing is obviously choosing the right model. Certain models better for certain things. You're kind of trading off speed, cost, performance, and all that sort of stuff. And so, you also have those nuances where like, from personal experience, my anecdotal experience anyways, like Claude models are better at doing like front end or design work and stuff like that. Whereas like a Codex model is, I can throw like some tougher problems at Codex and it'll be, at least my vibe check, like it feels like it's more in line with what I'm hoping to get out of the model. So choosing the right model, and then choosing the right harness, of course, on top of that. So the nuance there is, there's Cloud Code, Codex. I know some of us aren't like in software engineering and whatnot, but like Claude, the desktop app, like Cowork is essentially like Claude Code as far as like what it gives you to. It's just kind of like wrapped in a nice little GUI for you to interact with. And then same thing with Codex. Well, Codex now has a lot more general purpose integrations. Like I think they recently added like computer use and all that sort of stuff to it. And so you have to know what the like nuances is of the harness you're working with. And I was talking to Pratik about this, but like Pratik uses Pi, for example, which is like an open source harness that has been gaining in popularity, and Pi is like intentionally like a minimal, very minimal harness. They don't hold your hand, they don't inject a bunch of like tools and bloat the system prompt and all that stuff. That it basically wants to give you full control. And so like there's like varying levels. Like I think for the common person, like you probably don't need that like level of granularity and control, or you might not desire that. But for certain people, they do have very specific workflows and very specific instructions and very specific things that they want, and they don't want to be battling with, what Anthropic might be injecting into the system prompt for Claude Code and things like that. And so for me personally, I just use Claude Code and Codex. There's a ton of them out there. You can, some open source, some not. But I think my big thing is, I think for most power users, go ahead.
Oh, have you had the models pair program for each other?
I have. So I'll go into that a little bit toward the end, when I just show, because like all of this is kind of just leading up into like how I've packaged up my workflow and all that sort of stuff.
Apologies.
And so so like going off that, the thing is, these harnesses come with basic tools out the box, reading files, writing files, web search, all that sort of stuff. And but I think once you reach a point where you need certain capabilities that just isn't inherently there out the box, and so they offer you a lot of ways to do that. There's skills, which are just simple like text files, pretty much instructional text files. You can combine that with like scripts and other things like that, so that when like a skill is invoked, you can have that skill, instruct that there's this script available that could be executed for certain things and whatnot. And so yeah, it's just a simple like .md file. And we'll look at like my little toolkit thing that I use But yeah, skills, just simple markdown files pretty much. Again, you can have scripts, assets, and things like that that you reference in the skills so that it uses that. And skills applies to not just like, like the Claude Code harnesses and whatnot. You can use that with Claude Code or the Codex desktop app and all that sort of stuff. You can, you might not be using this for software engineers. Some people use this stuff for just like anything you can kind of do on a computer or with files. And skills are an easy way. I know for me, like 99.9% of my AI usage is just for software development. So my entire lens is like scoped on that. But you have skills, you have hooks that you can tap into. And the thing about this is that for a lot of this stuff, you can just get Claude Code to help you write that. They come out of the box with like skill creator skills and commands and stuff like that, to where if you have like a rough idea of kind of what you want a skill to do or be about, you can get it to write you a decent first draft and then just tweak it from there. And then, they also have things like hooks. So every harness, or the harnesses I use have different hooks you can tap into that basically allows you to like inject yourself into parts of the workflow. So say, like for example, Claude Code has like a tool call ended hook, for example. And so you can set up something to where when a tool call ends, you can have it execute like a command that you set up. And so every time, say it's like a workflow where it's writing some new code for you or something like that, you can set up a like post file edit hook that automatically invokes like your linting and formatting and test scripts or whatnot every time it makes a code change, which that's like a very, you might not want to do that directly because, it's doing a lot of file edits, and so you kind of want to be like very particular about when it should start to do things like that, because midway through some work, your code might not be in a state to pass tests and stuff like that. So, but that's just an example. You can hook into any of these like life cycle events, and essentially, if you identify things that you want to always happen, you can make that happen. The only thing I really use hooks for personally is to play audio, and that kind of stemmed from like when I was more working with like multiple agent sessions at once, just to like hear something play, so I knew when to tab over and stuff like that. And so that was something I was doing for a bit of time, but like I said, I kind of like reverted back to just kind of being more focused on like a single session. And then there's something called, the MCPs, the model context protocols. So a lot of like your favorite software and whatnot, they have MCP integrations that you can install, which allow you to basically easily connect, authenticate and then access data on like third-party platforms and all that sort of stuff. You can write your own MCP server if you want to do, to have your own server that's doing things that you want the agent to be able to pretty much hook into and call. And so, yeah, I think for moving further along past like the basics of like what harnesses have to offer, I think like the real main thing is that like context is everything, really. Like if like I said, I'm not like an AI like researcher or anything like that, and so you've probably heard like the simplified view that tokens are just like next token predictors and whatever that may be. Well, whatever it is, if it comes down to tokens in resulting in tokens out, then I think the core thing is that you want to be really particular about what you put in and very specific about what you put in to make what you get out of it higher quality and more in line with what you're looking for. And so part of that is that you should give your agents what they need. So I've personally like adopted OpenAI has this harness engineering blog post that goes into detail with sort of like on some of their internal projects. I guess they've been structuring code bases and whatnot so that I guess the core of that idea is making the repository knowledge the system of record. And so I do this in my side projects as well, where I'll have sort of like a docs folder that has different things similar to this. It's a subset of this, not everything that they do, but you know, like these harnesses and whatnot, they have access to your file system, and so if you like pair that with, you know, in code bases anyways, you can sort of have like an agent's MD file or whatever it may be. If you pair it with just like a little statement there that says like, hey, like, you know, you can, this directory here has, you know, this type of information and all that sort of stuff, you know, they're intelligent enough to go scan that and reference it when it feels like it needs to. And so you'll see that when I show you like my little plugin that I use personally, that there's a lot of inspiration drawn from like where things get output and where things get read from when you use the little plugin that I have personally. And so back to this, the large context window myth. You know, there's a lot of models coming out that's like, hey, we have a 1 million context window and all that sort of stuff. A lot of what I'm saying is like vibes based, but I know for certainty when I'm in a long session, if I'm passing, you know, 250K tokens or whatnot in the same conversation, it's very evident that like it'll just stop following instructions, and you know, there's just no telling what's going to happen at that point. And so I think for me, like a lot, like if I'm going on a long conversation, if there's like important stuff that I do want to preserve from that, you know, I'll take a quick checkpoint and tell it like, hey, like, you know, I'll put, you know, like persist, like write the notes on what we just talked about for this, like in this scratch file or something like that, and I'll just compact the conversation and then re-reference it, just to, you know, make that context window a bit narrower moving forward. And then another key thing that I like to adopt is just determinism where possible. So a lot of like AI stuff is, you know, AI inherently is like non-deterministic, right? Like you can send the same prompt 10 times and get 10 different things. And so like with these skills and things that I've put together for my personal workflow, you know, like some of the steps I've identified where it's like the model doesn't need to do this on its own. I can have like a bash script that does this step or that step, and things like that. You know, like I'll replace that with, instead of telling the model to like ask the user this, then do that, and do that. If it's like linear and you know, it's static in that manner, then you know, I'll equip it with a script and just say like invoke this script instead. And you know, that does two things. Like if you're relying on the model to go back and forth with the user, then you're kind of just hoping that it will do so. And then secondly, like I said, for more like stuff that you know should be deterministic, like outputting, like I'll show you like a config file or something like that for my little plugin that you know, I use a script for that. And so yeah, I think the whole idea is just to build your own system. I mean, you know, we're all leveraging these harnesses and whatnot, and obviously they have some opinionated things that are injected into it and whatnot, but everything we extend it for, everything like we build or use it on top of it, I think, you know, it's easy to reach for the publicly available skill that has like X amount of downloads and all that sort of stuff. But I think from my personal experience, I've just gotten a lot more of what I'm looking for when I take that skill that I like as a reference and then, you know, reshape it and fit it into like my way of working, or like my idea on how X, Y, and Z should be. And so, you know, building your system, stop repeating yourself. You know, it's easy to just, you know, have multiple sessions, you find yourself repeating the same thing, like, hey, like when you do this, make sure you look at that, when you do that, make sure you look at that. For a lot of things, you can just easily create a skill for that. Same thing with workflows, you find yourself following the same set of steps, doing the same set of things every time. Or like say, for example, when you want to plan a new feature, you want the process to look the same way every single time, then, you know, write a skill for that. And I'll show you a little bit of, I guess to conclude, yeah, a lot of this is just spitballing last minute stuff, but so like nothing I've talked about is like groundbreaking, especially like if you have skin in the game and whatnot, but it's more so like me personally, what I've used to, what I perceive as like closing that gap of spending way too much time trying to correct output and go back and forth with these models and all that sort of stuff. And so that's kind of, all of these things have kind of evolved into a plugin that I call bin, which is pretty much how I interact with AI. Like every time I use a harness now, I'm always like 99% of my prompts, I'm just invoking one of these custom skills that I put together. And so, like, just like practical look at like what these skills might look like. And so this is like the repository for my bin plugin. And so I have like a very specific way that I want to like plan features out for when I wanted to implement. I found myself repeating that like, hey, you know, like keep this living document and document your notes as you're building this out and stuff like that when you do each step. And so I've kind of just like encompassed this into my own set of like dev workflow skills. And so you'll see that, for example, when I want to plan a new feature, I have something called like the bin plan skill. And you can see that like I said, skills are applicable to even like Claude Cowork and stuff like that. But really at its core, it's just a text file that sort of has some front matter, just to give it the name and the description so that the agent, when it loads the skills that it has access to, it sees the description and the name. And you can see that like I have a particular way that I want to do my feature planning. And so, you know, phase one, you do your research, and then I like to be interviewed rigorously. So when I plan a feature with a model, like with a AI agent, like I don't want it to just assume that I want X, Y, and Z. I want it to make sure it understands like what my constraints are for like UX and all that sort of stuff, whatever it may be, depending on what I'm working on. And so part of, you know, I really wanted to interview me rigorously, and by having, you know, this skill setup that tells it like what each phase I'm expecting, what I want it to do. Now, whenever I want to, you know, plan out a new feature, I type /bin plan, and then I type like, oh, I'm trying to build this, blah, blah, blah. And I know that every single time I do that, it's gonna, you know, it's running through these same exact steps where it's first doing code-based research to like try to gather its own idea of what's going on, and then it, you know, interviews me rigorously. Like I even tell it to interview me on like the trivial stuff, just so that I can ensure that, you know, it understands what I'm looking for, as opposed to it just, oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry to interrupt. I'm fairly new to this space, but I feel like I'm having research. I do want to ask you, could you, with your work experience, could you differentiate skill versus, and what I was going to ask you, are you utilizing any like second brain tools like Obsidian, or I know you said that sometimes you have to take notes. I know Obsidian isn't the only way to do it, but
Yeah, so
what's the difference between the skill and utilizing kind of like the second brain or Obsidian?
So I think, I mean, I've heard of people using Obsidian. So Obsidian does store things as markdown files, which is like the same thing as like what a skill is. And so, assuming you're running like a harness in a directory with all those markdown files from like your Obsidian Vault or whatever it may be, then that gives like the model, like it's going to be, because it can navigate your file system, because you gave it the permission to, you know, it can find those files and read it, I guess, from your second brain. But if you have very specific instructions that you want for certain things, like say you have a bunch of different notes, like maybe you have like your daily journal, and then maybe you have like a note file for like some business you're working on or something like that. If you have like a very specific set of like steps or like sort of the way you want to behave when you're working with certain types of those files, then you can put together a skill. It's still going to have access to your second brain, assuming you're running that harness like right in that directory with those files, which I'm assuming you are, if it's tapping into that. But I also know that like, I think there's skills out there for Obsidian, but I know Obsidian has like, I don't use it to that level, but I know they have like graph features and all that sort of stuff. And I know you could, I think there might already be skills out there and stuff like that that allow it to know where to look for these files and
So do you feel like it's not for what you're doing, that it's not necessary because you have an alternative way of doing it, or?
Yeah, so essentially like your concept of second brain is sort of similar to my, going back to the OpenAI thing with like the harness engineering and stuff. So instead of me having like this stuff in my Obsidian Vault, inside of my code base, I have this like .bin directory here, and you can see that it sort of follows a similar structure to, sorry, it's kind of small. It follows a slightly similar structure to the OpenAI stuff, but you'll see that like when I do a bin plan, my skill is written in a way that it outputs that file to the little bin folder, the exec plans and all that sort of stuff. And so I think, yeah, it's pretty much the second brain, but for me, my second brain just lives within my code bases. Yeah, yeah. So like you'll see like the bin plan stuff. And this goes back to, I guess, your question about like, do I get, or I forgot who asked, I'm sorry. It was about using like other agents, like using other agents in combination with that. Yes, I do that. You'll see that I actually have a specific skill here called using other agents that kind of instructs it on how to call. If I'm running this in Codex, it knows how to call Claude, and if I'm running it in Claude, it knows how to run Codex and whatnot. And it all kind of taps back into the BIM plugin. You know, when you run BIM setup, it outputs like this YAML file in your code base, and you can kind of tweak like the default model you want to use for, say I'm doing BIM plan, and I wanted to go to Codex to review the plan that we came up with. You know, you can like override on like a per sort of functionality thing that I have. So I have like the BIM plugin essentially has a plan command that I use, and then it has a implement command that I use. And I think a key thing with when it goes back to like context management and stuff like that is that a good pattern to follow for skills itself is it's called, or they just, you know, it's progressive disclosure. So if an agent loads your skill and your skill is massive, that whole skill is getting loaded into it. And so instead, what you kind of want to do if you want to keep your context window down, because you know not everything in that plan might be, or in that skill directly might be relevant yet. You'll see that in my skills, I have just kind of like high-level overviews of what each phase is, and then I have, you know, for full details, see, you know, plan research where I go into much more detail about what I want to happen in the research phase. And so the models of the harness, like the models are intelligent enough to read this and see that, okay, I'm about to do the research phase, let me read this next file, as opposed to like, oh, let me load this whole skill and then half the information doesn't even apply. And I think with this, the most relevant part of that is the second opinion validation, where I can get Claude to call Codex to like review my plan and whatnot. In that case, it's like, I don't always need that. If I'm just planning out something straightforward and I do my initial review of the plan and I really like it, I don't always need it to go to Codex. And so like, if I inline all the information from this second opinion validation stuff, then, you know, it's just unnecessarily, you know, bloating that context window with instructions that it might not even care about.
So that leads towards like token management.
Right. So like, yeah, so like, you know, every single thread has that, you know, whatever you put into it and whatever it's putting out to you, that's all just grown in the context window. And so every subsequent message, I mean, it depends on what harness you're using. They all have like different ways of how they compact or like reduce the amount of context being used. Some of them are automatic, some of them aren't. And so I know if you're using Claude Code, at least from the CLI and stuff like that, I do use, but you can see that there's like a thing out there called, basically just launch it right here. So if I launch like Claude, you'll see that there's I use this plugin called like CC status line. And so you can customize sort of what pops up at the bottom. So, you know, like tell me a story or something. You can see like the amount of context that it's using as you're progressing through the conversation. And this is sort of like what I've used to have my little like vibes-based opinion of like large context windows like deteriorating performance, because I can see here that like I've noticed that like, oh, once I, you know, hit the 200K range and onwards, like I don't compact or find a new way to branch out, then who knows where we're gonna go from here. And so, yeah, like, you want to be really particular about, you want to give it enough information for what you're working on, but you also don't want to give it a bunch of unnecessary stuff that's like irrelevant to the task at hand, because then, you know, it's just, if, like I said, if we think of it as a functions of like tokens in and tokens out, then you want to make sure that what you're putting in is valuable for what you're trying to do. And so, I mean, I would show you all this in action, but I think there's just, I didn't even plan that far. What I will say is that as for software engineers, one of my favorite skills that I recently added to the arsenal is this thing called BIM artifact. And basically this kind of goes into the thing of like giving the agents good references and stuff like that. BIM artifact, it allows me to just say I have a library I'm using in my project or something like that, and it's open source. I can just type like BIM artifact and then paste the GitHub link to it. And what it'll do is it'll clone that repository into like this cache I have like in my user home. So if I already have it, I'm not re-downloading it or whatnot. And it'll inject, you can see, for example, like my agents MD for this project, you can see this section here on useful artifacts on some of the libraries I was using. And so like when I use BIM artifact, and now that I have like this block that gets inserted into my agents.md file, whenever I'm working on any sort of code that touches any of these libraries, the model, you know, it knows that, okay, like the actual full source code exists on this file system over here, and it'll actually like be able to like ground its implementation or like what it's trying to do or like what it's planning on doing in the actual like source code of the library I'm utilizing. So I think for developers, that's been like it's really improved. It's been like one of the tools or skills that have kind of like given me like the most bang for my buck, I would think. Just having the ability to just copy paste, and then from there on out, because it injects that into my little agents MD, just from there on out, it'll just pick that stuff up when it needs to.
Do you have a validator for that?
Sorry?
Do you just send the link and automatically pulls it, or do you have a validator you created so that you make sure it doesn't pull anything you don't want it to pull?
Yeah, so this is one of those things where I have like the scripts for. So like the skill comes with a, at a high level, it's you would type /BIM artifact and whatever, but the skill itself instructs it to run this checkout script. And so this is all like encoded in my bash, then like in this shell script to do, to fetch, to clone it from Git if it doesn't already exist, and if it does exist, and I want to fast forward it before adding that little block into my agents MD. Is it have I hardened it to be like super secure? Probably not. I think I'm the only one that uses it, and so like I haven't, like it's pretty consistent in just executing the shell script with what I give it, and so that's sort of where I'm at with that. And that's another one of those things where it's just like the whole adding like a bit of deterministic stuff into the workflows entirely. Like you could have written a skill that was just like run git clone and clone this and all that sort of stuff, but at least in this case, I know I want it to clone. I want it to fast forward if it already exists and stuff like. And I know I want it to inject into my agents MD if that's not already an entry and stuff like that. And so in that case, it's like instead of having the model just think about doing that and doing it itself, the shell script is just going to do the same thing.
Do you ever use direct open source, or is that agentic process basically replicating it new from scratch?
Like, do I use the libraries in my projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I use these are mostly what I use it for is like the libraries I'm utilizing in my project. And that's like a big thing I do use the BIM artifact for. So that way when I'm like, oh, go write this service, following like the effect libraries, best practices and whatnot. You know, like it'll go reference the effect code base, draw patterns from there, and the effect code base has AI docs and all that sort of stuff, so it can automatically just surface that on its own. But I also use it for libraries that I'm drawing inspiration from. Like I do look at open source code a lot, a good bit, just to like, I mean, I guess to like learn, but also just like understand what's going on under the hood with some of the stuff I use. And if I do see like, oh, I like, for example, like Pi, I'm like, oh wow, like the way they built out the custom plugin system and catalog and all that stuff, I think it's really elegant as a developer to use. And it's like, even though I'm not using that in my project, I'll still like BIM artifact it, and then when I'm doing my BIM plan, I'll be like, you know, I really like how Pi and this other library and that other library does their little catalog system. So like, let's draw patterns from there and talk about it and all that sort of stuff. And then I'll use that when I'm building out like my version of whatever it might be that I'm trying to like, it might not be the same thing exactly, but at least from like the DX perspective, like what APIs, like how they've put together the APIs that you can take advantage of and whatnot, like, you know, I'll use it for
But
that.
it's a little more read-only than for the open source. You use that as a foundational inspiration for the artifacts and what comes down.
Right, if it's a library I use in my project, I use it so that like it grounds, because sometimes you'll see that like, especially with coding, sometimes it'll just tell you like, oh, use this API. That API doesn't even exist on this version and all that sort of stuff that you're using and whatnot. Or it might tell you to like, oh, you know, just, and then sometimes it also goes into like the actual like downloaded dependencies, like say in like a JavaScript project or something, you have like your node modules or whatever. You know, and sometimes those libraries do ship their source maps and all that stuff that allows it to like navigate through there. But if it's an open source library anyways, I think having the actual like full repository on my file system, it can just go search for what it needs, see the exact implementation of that, you know, API that you're taking advantage of and stuff like that. And,
I suppose sometimes I get worried though if it's like a skill file or a harness or something that's been open sourced by someone. You don't know if it's like injectable. It's not anywhere. It's poison built in now.
yeah, I think that is a big thing, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying with like the skills I use and all that sort of stuff. Like a lot of the skills in this BIM plugin are drawn from other like popular skills that I've seen, but I prefer to have like control on that aspect of it. And so even sometimes there's a couple skills out there, like there's, well, BIM work, the dev workflow is pretty like heavily modified, but like, for example, I found a skill that has to do with like cleaning up, doing like an analysis of your installed project dependencies and stuff like that, and identifying things you can trim out and stuff like that.
There's a bunch of secrets outside, but that's what we're finding out. Literally, people dress.
Yeah, there's like a whole parade or something.
We were laughing at you because you see the just tops of their heads.
Other people watching.
I'm so did I didn't even realize, but
But you can't see them from your angle.
yeah, so like the last thing I'll say is just like, unless there's any other questions, is that like, even for skills where, I mean, you definitely want to be reading every single skill that you install, right? Like, you don't want to just, oh, this skill is about this thing that I do, and it has a lot of downloads, so let me just install it and just not think twice about it. I think you should always, at the very least, like be scanning to see what the skill involves and what it does. But my personal preference is to BIM artifact the skill, and then I'll literally just use the skill creator that comes with Claude and stuff like that to look at that reference, build me my own version of it, and I'll just like tweak it myself, and that way like I know the full contents of like every single skill. But I guess to your point with the BIM artifact stuff, like if a repo that it pulls down is poisoned in somehow and there is malicious stuff in there, then I guess that's in there, but that's like a bigger issue at the, you know, the library level, if that's getting into like their code base and whatnot. And so, and you know, we're seeing a lot of that anyways with all these supply chain attacks and whatnot. But I think for the vast majority part, like all the libraries I use are pretty standard, like popular, well-maintained libraries and whatnot like that. So I think I'm you still gotta be kind of careful, but I think you can have a genuine, like a implied level of trust when it comes to some of the libraries. But, yeah.
That's good. What type of agents do you use? And what do you feel like is the best? I mean, like, I said, so Hermes, OpenClaw, OpenUnion.
So I've heard of like the OpenClaw and Hermes stuff. I don't use either of those, to be honest with you, because like I said, like 99.9% of my AI use is literally just for software stuff. But I am like now, I guess, trying to like explore like, oh, how could I just apply these same concepts to like my personal stuff? I don't know. I feel like a lot of times when I see the, you know, like, oh, this thing will manage your email and your calendar and all that stuff. I'm like, I don't get enough emails for you to like, you know, need this thing to automatically do it and all that stuff. But some people do, and so I think like for me, harnesses that I use really mainly just Claude Code and then Codex, and then sometimes I use the Cursor CLI because I still have a sub that I canceled, but it runs until like August. So every month I just try to like get my usage out of that, which is nice for it's a their little composer model is fast, so I think when I have a solid plan that I'm confident in, I can rely on it to just quickly, you know, build out that plan. But yeah, those are really the only three I kind of use. Yep. Any other questions? I think I kind of just went crazy. Like, how long was that? Anyways, alrighty, well, thank you everybody for your time.